Hello and welcome to this webinar on avoiding ethical and societal AI risks. This webinar is part of the Swedish Innovation Week. I am Anna Felländer. I'm the founder of the AI Sustainability Center. Today, during an hour, we will deep dive in how public sector organizations can use AI Sustainability Center's practical framework to avoid ethical pitfalls and responsibly apply data-driven technologies and AI. Framework for Sustainable AI. That is a Vinnova financed project. So Vinnova is Sweden's state innovation agency for innovation. And the project is within utmaningsdriven innovation, challenge-driven innovation. So today's agenda, we'll have an hour. It's going to be a full agenda. We're very proud of having 3 of our partners to present their view and perspectives of the topic AI sustainability and the framework that they are working with us to apply. First, Andrea Risberg, the program manager at the AI Sustainability Center, will present the topic of AI sustainability and the practical frameworks with our tools. Secondly, we have the Swedish Employment Agency here and are very thrilled to have Ulrika Jonsson. She's the head of data-driven analysis and AI. We will also, and we're equally thrilled to have Johan Schauman from the Swedish Tax Agency. He's head of digital co-development. The final guest we have here today is the managing partner of Cirio law firm, David Frydlinger. He will give an overview of the legal implications in the context of sustainable AI. After that, we will have a panel discussion when you can submit your questions in the Zoom chat. So we will raise these questions as long as time allows us to. So please go ahead and just send a bunch of questions to us. We're more than happy to try to answer them for you. So why are we in deep dive into the area of AI ethics? Well, we believe that a new and just approach to AI is possible that considers both the negative and the positive aspects on people and society, as well as the commercial gains and other efficiency gains. We know that AI can create enormous value for people, society, and businesses. And this is what we call sustainable AI. And what is sustainable AI? Well, sustainable AI is measuring, identifying, and governing how AI applications and data-driven solutions are scaling in a broader ethical and societal context. So we take theory to practice. We have several partners from different universities to provide a multidisciplinary approach. We work with private organizations, public sector organizations, and tech scale-up and startups. So AI is different from other data-driven technologies. It's self-learning, self-scaling, and self-propagating. And because of that, the ethical and societal risks are difficult to detect with traditional models and risk assessment. And this leads to privacy intrusion, discrimination, unethical nudging, social exclusion. And the result from these risks is violation of trust and, of course, financial losses. So we say that organizations cannot wait for regulation to catch up. They need to create a resilient and systematic approach to AI ethical and societal risks. And today we are narrowing it down to public sector. I think AI and ethics in public sector is in our times the most important thing to keep trust between citizens and the state. The EU has published a paper, a white paper, where they define the high stakes sectors in where they propose regulations such as accountability and transparency. Public sector is one of these high stakes, so we know that regulations is around the corner. Also, AI for increased efficiency, it's a no-brainer. It's vast gains, and it will be the new normal. But equally important is to keep citizens' trust, to keep that at the core, and apply an ethical and societal approach. So, right now, I just kicked off this webinar, and I want to introduce my team member, Andrea Risberg, to talk about the fundamentals of the AI Sustainability Center, our AI Sustainability Lens, and the pitfalls, and finally discuss or introduce the framework, the Vinnova Innovation.
Thank you, Anna. So, my name is Andrea, and I'm the program manager at AI Sustainability Center. I lead projects where we apply our framework for ethical and sustainable AI together with our partners from both public and the private sector. And in this presentation, I'm going to introduce to you our framework, and then I'm going to do a deep dive on one of the framework phases, which is risk scanning, and introduce to you our risk scanning tool, the AI Ethical Risk Profiler. And our framework is built on an AI sustainability lens, 4 fundamentals, and 4 pitfalls. And this lens is an integration of 3 perspectives. It's a technical, a legal, and a societal perspective. And the lens is applied in order to account for ethical and societal risks with the use of data and data-driven technology in AI. And without this lens, it's very difficult to detect and predict these types of risks. And any organization working with data-driven technology needs to have at least these 4 fundamentals implemented. It's transparency, explainability, accountability, and AI governance. And for public sector organizations, they need to be transparent about what data they're collecting and for what purposes. They also need to be transparent about how and why an AI system made a particular decision or recommendation. They also need to define the right level of transparency. On one hand, considering the Swedish principle of public access to official documents, offentlighetsprincipen, and on the other hand, protecting what could otherwise be gamed or manipulated. They also need to be able to explain to their end users in non-technical terms how a particular system came to a certain conclusion. And there also needs to be someone responsible, but also accountable for the use of data. And in order to achieve all of this, you need to define the right structures and processes, and these need to be monitored across the full AI lifecycle in order to make sure that the fundamentals are continuously implemented. So I told you about the lens, and I told you about the fundamentals. Now let's look at the pitfalls. So these are our pitfalls. They are the result of 3 years of research. They can be applied to any sector and any size of an organization, both public and private. And the characterization of these pitfalls is done from an integration of an organizational and a societal perspective. And that's what makes them unique. All AI researchers know that there are biases, yet they would characterize them in silos. And that means that you miss the broader perspective. So if we look a little bit more specifically into the pitfalls, we have, for example, immature data and AI. At the moment, there's no market readiness threshold for AI applications. This means that at the moment, we're seeing companies like IBM and others withdrawing some of their tech products after realizing that they're simply not mature enough to be brought to the market. And that's what happens with their facial recognition technology recently. Another pitfall is misuse and overuse of data. Now, even though an organization is GDPR compliant, when you combine different data sets, you can end up with insights that are privacy intrusive. And for consumers and citizens, it's very hard to understand how these insights are created. There's a gap between what we as consumers say that we're comfortable with giving up privacy-wise for digital services, and the digital footprint that we actually leave behind. And this is something called the integrity paradox. Another pitfall is when values and biases are intentionally or unintentionally programmed into an AI application. And this becomes even more probable when you have a lack of diversity within your organization. And the final pitfall is data bias. It's very common that you have a data set that is not representative of the reality that you want to reflect. Maybe you lack data about a specific demographic. If you then train an AI model on such an unbalanced dataset, you risk that your model will make inaccurate predictions, recommendations, or decisions for that specific demographic. And such outcomes could even be discriminatory. All the pitfalls leads to risks, such as privacy intrusion, discrimination, unethical nudging, or social exclusion. It's AI violating trust and leading to financial losses. So in order to avoid falling into one of these pitfalls, AI Sustainability Center offer organizations a practical framework for identifying, measuring, and governing ethical and societal risks from the use of data and AI. And by applying the framework, you will get an independent validation of responsible use of data and data-driven technology. And this framework is Vinnova innovation, which is built on several years of research. It's a systematic approach that can be applied on solutions with varying degree of digital maturity, as well as on solutions that are either planned in development or already implemented. Now, if we deep dive on the risk scanning phase here, we have developed a risk scanning tool, the AI Ethical Risk Profiler. This is a self-assessment tool hosted on MetricStream's governance, risk, and compliance platform. And it will activate cross-functional cooperation across your organization. And after the self-assessment is completed, you will get an AI Ethical Risk Profile. And this risk profile identifies your exposure to risks, as well as where in your organization you could have weaknesses. And this risk profile can be leveraged in many different ways. You could use it as a go-to-market control, a final check to assess whether or not your solution is ready to be implemented. But you could also use it in procurement processes if you want to risk assess data-driven solutions when you procure them. So, as I mentioned, applying the framework will give you an independent validation of responsible use of data and AI. And this will enable you to stay ahead of the regulatory curve and avoid legal breaches. And the results from applying the framework, they are meant to be implemented in your organization's structures and processes to make sure that they are reflecting the digital world. And finally, as the pressure increases for public sector to apply AI to increase efficiency, citizens need to trust that they're being treated in a fair way. And if you have a systematic approach for identifying, measuring, mitigating, and governing ethical and societal risks, you will be able to be transparent and tell them about the actions you are taking to avoid data-driven risks. And we will now hear from Ulrika Jonsson, Head of Data-Driven Analysis and AI at Arbetsförmedlingen, and she will tell us about how they applied our framework on one of their use cases and how this enables their broader digital transformation journey. And we are very proud to work with Arbetsförmedlingen. They've been a partner to the center since the very beginning. So welcome, Ulrika.
Okay, so I am going to give you a brief summary of our ongoing journey at Arbetsförmedlingen, where we are working with AI. So it's AI at AF. And I think that maybe you need to start with the question, okay, so why should Arbetsförmedlingen use AI at all? And I think that there are a number of reasons for this, obviously. And all of us, I mean, AI is here, all of us is using it every day. You can just perform a Google search and you have used AI, right? So it is already here to a very, very large extent. And I think the fact that we all are using this on more or less a daily basis is definitely raising our expectations on service and customer experience. And just as for, I think, almost every business and organization on the planet, I think also for Arbetsförmedlingen, there is a huge promise in improving the services and the experience for our customers. This applies both to existing services, improving them, but also I think probably there's a plethora of not yet seen services that we are going to be able to offer customers with the help of AI. Of course, we've already been into the efficiency perspective or the bang for the buck perspective. Improved value for money, I think, is definitely a big factor in this as well. The obvious use case for AI applications is to automate and to create self-service based services. And this is, of course, a huge, big for the bang factor for taxpayers and citizens. Also, and maybe not so obvious, I think that it's important that also the public service organizations can offer something for the talent pool. This is a non-profit alternative for the part of the talent pool that is interested in participating in building AI applications, and maybe in particular for those who are interested in applying ethical aspects on building the AI applications. This list could probably be made huge. I have tried to look at AI for Arbetsförmedlingen through the lens of our values. So what you see on the left side here in the picture is actually our values at Arbetsförmedlingen. And I think that the AI development correlates very well with our values. However, maybe a more relevant question is, why should we not use AI? And I will get back to that later on. Okay, so what are we really doing then? I'll try to give you a picture of that, the key areas, the AI assignments we're currently working with. So first of all, and I would say that this is something that we are really proud of, we have a decision support system, AI-based, already in production, which we have been using in production since April this year. This is a profiling solution. It's a machine learning model that we use to assess the distance from the labor market. And this may sound a bit academic, maybe, if you're not into this area, but the fact of the matter is that this is really a core business process at Arbetsförmedlingen. So this is really at the core of what we are doing. So it's a great achievement that we are using an AI solution for this. In addition, we are working on a project or participating in a project that is also financed by Vinnova and led by RISE. It's about automatic text interpretation, or could be used for automatic text interpretation. This is a project about natural language processing. And even if we have not ended up with what should be the primary use case for this, I think that you can all probably envision a lot of use cases where we could use better NLP to create a lot of innovative automatic text interpretation solutions. It could be that we automatically create job ads for employers. It could be that we improve matching between job seekers and employers. There are all sorts of use cases, I think, that can be based on having a really good natural language processing capability at the bottom. And something that we also are putting a lot of effort into, and that I think is maybe an area where that is easy to underestimate before you have started, is to create a scalable AI platform. You have to put a lot of effort into establishing the infrastructure and your data pipelines and everything that you need to have a smooth pipeline in order to really scale your AI applications. A lot of people think that your biggest effort will go into working with your models and the algorithms per se, but our experience is that you need to put a lot of effort into this area rather than working with the models. And I have also tried to illustrate here how these areas tie to our strategic goals as at Arbetsförmedlingen. And I think that they are well connected with our strategic goals and really support our way forward. All right, as I mentioned in the beginning, I would get back to the why not question. And this is really where AI Sustainability Center comes into play. And they have been part of our development with the profiling solution that I mentioned as the first area on the previous slide. And what this partnership really offers us is then a structured approach to work with this why not thing. The ethical and societal risks involved in developing and launching AI applications is definitely not something you should disregard. So I'll try to mirror Andrea's presentation before on how we have used this framework and more from a practical perspective. So you have your definition, your problem definition or your use case that you intend to use with your AI solution, right? That you have tried to draw and illustrate in some way, describe how this is going to work, including which data will this solution need. And you put that through the AI Sustainability Center's framework, and you get this ethical risk profile, where you get your AI pitfalls analyzed, a lot of questions that are answered in relation to these areas, the AI pitfalls and the sustainability fundamentals. And that then is translated into a risk management toolkit, I would call it, where you have a very structured and practical approach on continue to working with managing and eliminating these risks. All right, so responsible or sustainable AI then, how do you do that? I'll try to give you a bit more personal perspective maybe than just working with AI Sustainability Center. That is definitely a good step on the way, but I think that you also need to work with sort of a broader mindset on how to reach responsible AI. And not this either will take you all the way, but hopefully it will help you on the way. So first of all, I think that you really need to go cross-functional. Developing AI solutions is definitely not just an IT thing. If you put your AI developers into a room and say, go find me an AI solution to this problem, that's not going to be a good solution. Developing AI solutions very soon in the process gets very complex, and you need different people's perspectives to look at the problem and to look at the solution and to look at the risks. It won't do with having just IT people in the room. You need business people, deep business understanding. You need to understand the data that you're going to work with. You need to understand the strengths and weaknesses in your data. You need to understand the legal perspective, which is definitely not an easy thing either. So cross-functional is the thing. Curious is my next message. I think that part of this, you need to ask loads and loads and loads of questions. And you need to overcome the barrier of being afraid of asking stupid questions. And this is also why it's so important to have the cross-functional team. Different people, they have different perspectives, they come up with different questions, and they all tend to be really relevant and important for you to solve. The third thing, conscious. Yeah, it does require some consciousness to develop AI solutions. You will need to apply a lot of analytical skills. You will need to figure out how to adapt to changing societal conditions. Take the pandemic that had an impact on our profiling solution. You need to assess and adjust again and again. An AI solution is definitely not a one-time release thing. You need to work on this continuously. And I think this list could probably also be made very long, but I have chosen these 3 perspectives, which I maybe think are the most important ones, and hopefully something that could lead you or help you to end up like this, where everybody's happy about the AI solution, it's really on target, and it has taken you to the skies. All right, so I'm going to sum up. Our journey continues, just like many else's journeys, and of course there are remaining challenges, definitely, and will be for a long time. I've mentioned the data perspective. Working with data as a strategic asset is, I think, a challenge not only for us, but for many organizations. You need to apply that perspective across the whole organization, and it may not be sufficient to just apply it on your own organization. You probably want to use data originating from other organizations as well. Again, back to the ethical perspective, right? It's not an easy thing. The explainability. This is also why why asking questions and being curious is so important. I think asking questions is the mother of explainability. So this is why it's important to ask questions. And explainability is a challenge in AI applications. It's not really built into AI applications to explain what they are doing, right? Okay, and establishing this assess, adjust, and adapt cycle that I mentioned, that's also a challenge because it takes a lot of work to get to this point and to get a smooth process that you can really apply and apply and apply again onto your AI application. The pace of legal changes, or just the complexity of legal changes, balancing that with the expectations that you may encounter on your outcomes with your AI applications is a challenge. And if you then add on top of that the pace of the technical development, which is really fast, then you have a really nice equation and combination of things to try to balance, which is a challenge, I think, for everybody working with these types of solutions. However, I want to say that even if there are a lot of challenges remaining, for me personally, I really think that the possible opportunities and positive sides of AI really outweighs the challenges. And my right picture here is to illustrate that perspective, and that only the sky, or maybe not even the sky, is the limit. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ulrika. So I want to just linger and comment on the explainability conclusion remark. There is a trade-off between explainability and accuracy of the model. And we see a tendency at the AI Sustainability Center of organizations pushing towards having the AI model more explainable and kind of step aside and from the seductive profits that a super accurate but non-explainable AI model can lead to. You have a history working with AI in private sector, and from that perspective, is there different approaches in this trade-off?
Yeah, well, I would say that there is definitely a difference, because in the public sector, you are really obliged to, in another way, I think, to explain to the citizens how did you come up with this decision or this conclusion. And from a private sector perspective, you may not be as pushed to do that from your customers. So the level of expectation from both the customers and the general societal context is really not the same, is my experience.
Okay, so we're so happy to have you here in this webinar. We will talk later when you join the panel. Thank you so much, and see you in a bit. So it's time to introduce the next speaker. That is Johan Schauman. You are head of digital co-development. The Swedish Tax Agency is also one of the founding partners of the AI Sustainability Center, and we're so excited to hear reflections on the topic, on your work, and how you see the future. So enter the stage.
The concept of AI or automation is has been used for a long time within the Swedish Tax Agency and in different fields. I could give you some of the examples that we're using today. Like, for instance, we have a chatbot called Skatteverket, where you can ask questions and you get answers back. It's originally a model that was used in Norway. So what they did was that they learned the software to speak Norwegian in a sloppy way, that is Swedish. But that also illustrates maybe one of the challenges in when you develop something that recognizes text or analyzes text, that you need to program the model so they can understand not only people that have gone to university or people that have spoken Swedish for 30 or 40 years, but also people that just came to Sweden and maybe speaks Swedish in a completely different way and ask their questions in a different way. We also have speech analysis, that when you call the Swedish Tax Agency, you're being asked by an automated answering machine what your topic or what your business is, what you want to do. And then when you state your case, then you'll get directed to a handler that can help you in a better way. And it's the same thing there. You need to have a broad perspective of how you could be able to talk and still get to be directed in the correct way. When you file your income tax return, there is a field when you can type in additional information that you just want to provide for the tax agency. So it's not a pre-printed information that you just approve. We've used text analysis there as well to direct maybe further control or handle it completely automated, because between 70 and 80% of the information that's provided there is something that we don't have to do anything further, just to note that you have provided the information. We use extensive IA solutions in selection of who to control or what company to control or make audits with, and that's been used for a very long time, and in different generations of AI as well. But I would like to spend a little bit more time talking about what we are trying to do and what really challenges the use of AI for us. And that's the concept of handling your tax situation or handling your administration in connection to tax in your own environment. For instance, when you do your bookkeeping in your business system, where you sell your property, where you a platform that you use if you want to let out your house or your flat to another person. There are many different situations where tax is a part of the process, and we believe that in the future it won't be enough for us to provide solutions in our environment, on our platform, on our web page, or our own e-services. We need to be where you as a customer are. And that puts a lot of questions raised. We would say that in general, using AI and using lots of information, because the tax agency obviously has a lot of information, that raises questions about the feeling of being controlled or surveillance, that you live in a George Orwell 1984 society. And that there's a fine line between using big data or using the amount of data and predictions we can make for you to help you, to give you a high level of service. But on the other hand, to feel that we monitor everything you do. So this is one of the questions that we really need to figure out, where that line is and who to ask and how to form our solutions. When working with other parties, external parties like private companies or other agencies, we also need to analyze what do people or companies think will happen to their data, the data that they sent to the Swedish tax agency, but is now being used in other places, in other processes and situations. There is the TUP, the once only principle, that a lot of people throughout the world feel that it's a better thing that if you provide your one piece of information to one government agency, you think that's enough. Maybe the government agencies in that country could share that information, so I don't have to provide the same information to 5 or 6 or 7 different agencies. But at the same time, there's also, again, a question of handling the fine line between making it convenient for you or maybe using the information in a way that you don't feel comfortable with when sharing the information within agencies. There's an additional thing that I think a lot of you have experienced, that is if you approve for your data to be shared, like a consent. Most people just scroll down to the bottom and you click the box and then you go, because you want to go on doing whatever it was you intended to do. But in this case, if you approve or consent to your data being used in other situations outside of the agency, in this case the tax agency, how do I know where this stops? What was it that I consented to? There is now, as far as I know, no really good way in doing this in an easy way, or in a way that is explainable for everyone. Some of the other aspects have already been raised, like for instance bias. If we build these models, whether it's the ones that we already use or the ones that we intend to use in the future, how can we make sure that we don't build in bias? Because, for instance, that we have a limited level of different people or different aspects or different background or different culture within our organization. Because even if we, as Ulrika mentioned, work cross-functional, maybe if the people all are very similar to from their background, because they all come from the same sort of background, or use the same language or other aspects of what your upbringing is about, then you might get just a too narrow perspective on how to develop these solutions. And another aspect that we have talked a bit about as one of the hazards or one of the risks is that you need to know what question or what objective you have that you want to solve using AI or automation. One of the most common, as we've already heard, is that you want to make your organization more efficient. You want to find quicker or cheaper ways of solving your challenges. But at the same time, you need to keep your eyes on what is really the objective. Like, for instance, in our case, could we find a way where we have to choose, or that we don't have to choose? Because maybe if we would form the solutions in one way, we would maximize the tax revenues this year. But would that be to the price of losing in trust, or losing in building our relationship towards the taxpayers and society? And also, if we have this amount of data that we have, and we have that because it's been legislated that we are entitled to have this data to do X, Y, Z, and in most cases to make decisions on your tax. If we can use that data to other things, maybe in your environment, maybe within our organization, but with other objectives than the ones that we have legal support to gather information for. That's also one of the things that maybe because we want to enhance or improve our controlling systems. Maybe we want to give you better service, so the intentions can be good, but still it's not why we gather the information from the beginning. So these are only some of the aspects that we have been talking about or thinking about at the Swedish Tax Agency for a long time. So when we came on to AI Sustainability Center, we found that we got another tool, another way of, as Ulrika named, to have a structured approach to consider what we need to do to have a sustainable AI strategy. So I would be thrilled to have further discussions with the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Yes, you will, but please let me just comment. And a question. So my comment is that the corona crisis and the strained public finances would probably lead to that you have to do more with less resources, or the same with less resources. So from my perspective, it's even more important to actually have a systematic approach if you would have more demands for efficiency from the government.
Yeah, I would say the pandemic has absolutely put a heavy strain on the organization. We've had to postpone a lot of development and to focus to helping businesses mostly to make it through the day or through the week or through the month. So that has and that gives a perspective on when you have to do something very quick.
Yeah.
Maybe you forget about the aspects that you need to consider when handling tax errands. So I would say that to have a structured approach is even more important when the pace is high.
So I was going to ask you, because I find them to be extremely delicate decisions on what a trustworthy and fair AI approach should be, and I was. It's so interesting and fascinating, this project of yours on third-party platforms, yet even or equally important as you reach out, I would say, to all public agencies to have a aligned strategy, so we have democratic counterpart as a citizen.
Absolutely, and I would say that, for instance, when starting a business, if you do like starting a restaurant, you would think that we could provide a package or a service that would be covering everything within the tax agency, but still that doesn't qualify, because you have to deal with Bolagsverket, kommunen, and the police, and several other government agencies. So maybe 8 or 9 or 10 different processes within your starting your restaurant. So again, to have, in that perspective, working together with other agencies to find a mutual concept on how you form digital strategy is even more important now when you have all of these options and possibilities.
Right, so thank you, and I'll see you in a bit in the panel.
Thank you.
And now we come to the point where we will invite David Frydlinger to the virtual digital arena stage. You are the managing partner of Cirio,
Yes.
law
Hi, Anna.
firm.
Yeah.
You were also with us from the beginning. You've been part of developing the framework, the tools, and also guiding our clients through the framework phases. You've been active in the public scene with your approach to ethical and legal AI and the balance or interlinkage between them two.
Yeah.
And
Nice
we have had discussions earlier on the topic, and even though I know kind of what you say, this is a picture showing it in a very structured way, but I think you should just kick off and talk about just the perspective on the legal issues and the 4 areas of risk from Cirio's perspective.
Yes, and obviously this is a developing area of law as well. I think you mentioned this earlier. There is upcoming legislation coming from the European Union, so this is sort of a present state picture. And I think as a lawyer, when I approach AI in a broad sense, and we have 4 different areas of risk that you should sort of control for. And I can just briefly go through them, but I think the most important ones for the audience now in the public sector is maybe the third one, the breaches of law. But I mean, there are obviously risk, loss of asset control. The assets, which can be the algorithms and the data, etc.
Right.
Of course, it's so important to protect by various measures. You can, of course, incur liability also as a public sector organization for damaging the integrity of others, etc. I mean, the GDPR applies, of course, to public sector organizations as well, and you can discriminate, etc. And on the bottom there, the contracts, of course. I mean, to the extent that you engage a supplier in helping you with your AI project, they can be of various quality. But I think it's fascinating to think about the breaches of law. This is a picture showing sort of any kind of organization. It's interesting. I mean, obviously there are possibilities of breaching the law, and I think, I mean, in the public sector you have sort of the 3 pillars of public administration law: legality, objectivity, and proportionality. And there's so many ways this is expressed in different ways of legislation also, and that is obvious risks, not only ethical then, but legal risks of breaching that. I mean, we had the discussion of this. I mean, to what extent can I have an automated decision being made actually, or to what extent is this a recommendation that I cannot do? I mean, if I apply, if I have the wrong kind of data, to what extent can I say that I have taken an objective view when making the decision, or the AI took the decision? And of course, proportionality also. I mean, the measures taken in the decision, for example, should be proportional to the interference with someone's life, etc. How do you make that kind of assessment? Those are the sort of legal. They are obviously also ethical, but they are sort of legal things that lawyers in the public administration and in the municipalities sit with every day and have to sit with. So this, I think, is a fascinating area, and obviously lots of risk there. And also, and I think we discussed here before, that to a large extent the current public legislation is not really adapted to this. I mean, this possibility of making automated decisions is quite new, actually, for example. And so the legislation is not technique neutral, basically. It's being made for a human oversight, which can maybe be good, but can also prevent automation. So yeah, so these are sort of the main risk areas I would, but of course they have a certain delicate quality when it comes to public sector. Also, I think, I mean, there's all this research showing that the trust in agencies like Arbetsförmedlingen and the tax authority has a quite large impact on the entire trust level of the entire society.
But are you concerned that when the regulatory framework and regulation is not catching up, are you concerned that lawyers or risk organization and compliance organizations do not have the right tools, or also the mandate or the understanding that they need to step in here ahead of the regulatory curve?
Yes, and actually not least in the public sector, because what I said now that I mean the public sector authorities has such an important responsibility for keeping the trust level of the entire society. And when an AI scales up, and all of a sudden the tax agencies start to discriminate based on gender, I don't know. I mean that could be quite catastrophic.
Not under our watch.
Not under our watch, and we will help you. But if you can see the implications, right? And this is, and you and I have been discussing this, who should be involved in this also. And I think, and we can shift to the next slide, I think personally it's very important to have lawyers included. And this may be obvious to many, but I see many AI projects being started in product development department, to simplify, right? And not necessarily and thinking about all the great stuff you can do for the benefit.
Talked about cross-functional teams and structures, organizational structures.
But here I think it's key actually to have lawyers. I mean, this picture tries to show that there's a core in all kind of legislation actually, but not least in public administration law of protecting human dignity. And you have to have fairness. You have to treat all the citizens alike. You should not harm them. Should keep their autonomy, etc. And that's a common core between both the ethical and the legal questions. So lawyers, we are, even though some might not admit that, quite used to making sort of ethical assessments actually. So I think it's a key actually for everyone to include the lawyers early on in this because one is so used to making these kind of assessments.
So what is your suggestion or your recommendation to public agencies joining us today?
No, and I think, as Ulrika said, I mean, to if you're a lawyer and don't know if you have an ongoing project in your your authority, reach out and find out. If you're not a lawyer and working with this, reach out also to the lawyers. I mean, there are many legal aspects. I mean, in the you and I have discussed this also, which is not everyone has to do with automation. But as I said, since the legislation is not really adapted to automation or to being digitalized, there are a large number of questions. So I think cross-functional responsibility, as I think, is a good advice.
So thank you, David, and you will be part of the panel.
Yeah, I'll move over here.
You move over there, please, and I will welcome back Ulrika and Johan, and some questions from the audience. Okay, Andrea. So you have the ear to our audience and have selected some of the questions that were asked during the different speeches.
So we have a question here. How do we make sure that public sector innovation is promoted and not hampered when it comes to AI ethics?
Well, I would say that we have had issues with dealing in what is even innovation, because when we come to developing our processes, that's not the same thing as innovation. And we've been, as I said, when introducing digital into a transformation of our capacity or transforming the entire agency, those are one of the questions that we need to really work on. How do we promote inventions, and how do we get inventions not just from like an innovation team, because we have an innovation team, but how can we make innovation like more of a standard, more of a part of the culture within the entire organization, because we're 10,500 people. So if it would be strange if only the innovation team had the best ideas. So I would definitely think that we need to nurture or culture that type of thinking, and that requires quite a lot of skill enhancing and learning and training within the staff.
I don't see a conflict between innovation and ethics, not least when it comes to the public sector. I mean, the public sector organizations have an extremely important sort of role for the, and responsibility towards the citizen, which can be expressed as an ethical responsibility. I mean, I don't see a conflict at all, actually.
Let's try if my mic works better now. Ulrika, do you want to comment?
Well, I do definitely see a conflict or a potential conflict, at least a challenge, to be a bit diplomatic. And I don't know what the right answer is either. But I think just take the ability to experiment with data. There's a conflict, I think, to be able to use data, maybe just on an experimental stage at first, to develop solutions and then bring that to a larger scale. So maybe one part of the solution to the problem would be to make sure that you have different processes to work with early stage innovation, where you can be more freely. And then when you decide that, okay, out of these 10 experiments, I'm going to continue with 3 of them, and then you have a more rigorous framework, for example, to apply those aspects.
You can risk assess them. You can do the ethical risk profiler and get a threshold to go to market, and based on that have a structured approach to it.
Thank you for that. Here's another question. Often when we talk about applying AI in public sector to increase efficiency, that's often seen as something kind of negative. But can it be something positive? Can it be something that can create societal benefit?
Absolutely. I think definitely. I mean, why would it not? But I think that the key here is to be really aware of the potential drawbacks and the ethical and societal risk side of it.
Yeah, I would definitely say that if we would be more efficient in stopping tax crimes, for instance, people that deliberately avoid taxes, systematic criminal activity. If we could stop that earlier on, then we would save tax money for the people that actually are entitled to that money. And also, for instance, now during the pandemic, we have seen that companies apply for different support in different support systems or legislation, and they have to wait for their money. So if we would have had a more efficient system or a more digitalized, enhanced system, then we would have been able to give the right company the right money and stop the payments for the wrong companies.
Transferable to our organization as well.
I think we have time for one final question, but you have to keep your answers short. So, final advice to any public agency, any public sector organization that wants to start applying AI more?
Wow. To be curious, to talk to others that have applied AI already, and study a lot of things, and then start asking yourself questions where I can use it, but also be quite critical in when you use it.
Look at your business problem, look at your data accessibility and quality, pull together your cross-functional team and get to it.
No, I would say call them. And Anna. No, to be honest, I mean, because you are quite far ahead and you have tackled so many of these challenges, so that would be my advice. You can call me as well, but I think, I mean, he has real more experience.
Yeah, they already pay our salary, so.
Well, the reason why we started the center was that we were going to actually. No, I lost it. I looked at you and I was like, yeah. No, the reason why we started the center was to actually go from theory to practice and actually pull together a structure and best practices. That's the thing. There are a lot of talks in the EU about the regulation, the theory, the threats, the risks. But then how do you do it? And when legislation occurs about accountability, explainability and transparency, that's the beginning of it, because then you have to dig in and apply that to your organization. So I am going to show you the last slide. We're absolutely super thankful and grateful that you spent an hour with us during this Innovationsveckan. What we want to send to you after this seminar or this webinar is our just quick check. It's a mini survey of what Andrea explained about the ethical risk profiler. So you can today, after the seminar, go into our website or get this link per email, and then you can fill in and get super quick indication if and where you are exposed to ethical risks in your AI application. And this whole session is recorded. It will be under our website, under events, AIsustainability.org. And also I encourage everyone to sign up for our newsletter. And it's 1 minute to 1, and I want to thank you all for spending an hour with us. And please, if you want to join AI Sustainability Center, just give us a call and or email. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Är vi av? Gud, jag tappade det där. Vad var det jag sa? Jag bara, that's the reason why we started the center.